Hello, students. I'm going to give you an overview of what teaching strategies for replacement behaviors would look like, whether it's for a functional communication training plan or a behavior intervention plan. And it's essentially how do we teach, how do we prompt, and how do we reinforce students to use the replacement behaviors once we've determined what they are. So I'm going to continue for those who are in SPED 125. We talked about Cookie Monster. So just kind of give you an overview. Remember, Cookie Monster was one of my students when I taught in the classroom. He had autism spectrum disorder and an intellectual disability. And remember, I was in a special day classroom for students with autism, but I also had students with Down syndrome and intellectual disability. Cookie Monster had very limited verbal skills as far as expressive language, so he would usually do 1 to 2 word utterances. He would use some picture icons to indicate what he wanted, and sometimes he could tell us what he wanted, but it wasn't with a lot of verbal skills. Although he did have really great receptive language skills, so he could read at he can read at about a kindergarten level at least. He could follow instructions if he was motivated and reinforced. He could follow transitions. So we knew he had really good receptive language skills. He, of course, as students with autism generally do, worked best with routines. We used a lot of visual schedules, token board for him. And then also what I learned about for Cookie Monster, and you might learn with some of your students, like he needed at least 10 seconds of processing time if we gave him an instruction. So if we said, okay, it's time to go to your C, we would have to sit there and kind of count for 10 seconds. So let me do that in my head. That's a long time. It's a long time to wait and allow students to process. And so it was a very big change for us because he really needed that time to take it in and then decide, yes, I'm going to do that. He's like, I'm going to comply. And then we also needed to give him a lot of personal space. So if you gave him an instruction right next to him, he probably that would not lead to a lot of compliance in a sense. It's like give him an instruction and give him his space and his time, and then he would be more likely to comply. And it's really funny because, and some of your students might need this as well. You might find when you're in your classrooms working directly with students that they do need some processing time. Sometimes you need to give them an instruction and then leave so that they can kind of take it in and decide, yes, I'm going to do this, not because my teacher's telling me to, because sometimes their behaviors are just, they don't really want to listen. This is true of my son. Like, so, and I think I gave this example in class sometimes. I would want him to turn off the TV, but if I stand there and wait for him to do it, he's really less likely to do it. So I've learned that if I tell him, okay, it's time to turn off the TV so we can do this next thing, I'm going to go in the other room for a minute. And when I come back, you need to turn it off. And it's like, it works really well. It's amazing. So those might be some ideas that you try to include with whether your case studies or your actual students in your classes. But with Cookie Monster, his problem behaviors again were aggressive. So he would hit, kick, scratch, bite, or throw items. And obviously, if we give him personal space, you kind of take 4 of those aggressive behaviors out of contention, right? Because if he's not close enough to you, he wouldn't like come across the room to hit us. He would hit us if we were right next to him, and he would scratch or bite us if we were right next to him. So if we're not next to him, um, he couldn't get away with those behaviors. And then, but he also would drop to the ground. He would lay on the ground, refuse to pick up his materials, refuse to go to his seat. And again, and just to remind you, like if we left him there to do that because we didn't want to physically prompt him or we hadn't had this behavior plan in place, he could stay there all day. It wouldn't bother him to stay on the floor and have people ignore him the majority of the day. And then he would only get up if it was lunchtime and they'd be like, oh, I'm hungry. I'm going to go out and get my lunch. So That's where you'll see some of the elements come up in this plan. So when we develop our intervention plans, remember the first thing that we need to focus on are antecedent-based interventions. That's why I had all of you learn about these in previous class sessions. So you have your course resources, the affirm module, and the assignment related to ABI, and a lot of different ideas, especially according to different functions of the replacement behavior, right? So if the function of the behavior is attention, then you need to focus your antecedent-based interventions on attention in addition to some other ones. So when we look at these, we want to plan for the interventions. We need to train our aides in how they're used, and we need to make sure that they're actually using them. And then you need to make sure that they're being consistently used throughout the day by all adults. So when I taught him in my class, like one of the interesting things, I had other students, or any of them really, that out at snack and lunch, and they would have a token board that went with them. So I made little, like you can see here, I made these little to-go token reinforcement boards, and then so that students can be reinforced when they weren't in the classroom. And I had all those in place, and then the aides would come back and say, so-and-so was doing this, and blah, blah, blah. I said, well, where's the token board? And they said, oh, it's in the classroom. I said, well, you need to take it out so that you can focus on positive behaviors. And that was kind of like interesting for the IAs to it was interesting to see them react like, oh yeah, I have to do this. So making sure that they're following up with that. All right, and here's a quick reminder of why we use antecedent-based interventions. It's preventative, and we arrange them in advance, right? And they're very efficient and easy to implement. So remember to go back to the handout, the other course resources when we talked about these, to find appropriate ones for you. Here are the antecedent-based interventions that I put in place for Cookie Monster. And the first one is a visual schedule of activities throughout the day. And this is something that we had pretty commonly for all of our students. So this was what one of mine looked like. And you can see I have like some visuals here, and then the times and the check marks. So this would be something that could travel with the students. And so we made sure to always have this for all of our students, but especially the ones that needed it the most. The other one that we had was, of course, a token reinforcement board. So this is very common, of course, in mod severe classrooms. So we had the I'm working for, and then in ours, for him, and a lot of our students that needed the individual token boards, their choices were on the back. So they would just pick a picture and they put it on the front, and then they would have their token board. And because my token economy was all based on money, I wanted my students to be similarly based, but you could see the example in the slide presentation. I have maybe more of an interest-based one. So if he really likes superheroes, incorporating learner preferences into things is, of course, another antecedent-based intervention. But I wanted to keep mine functional, and I wanted to keep mine similar to my other students who just had money as reinforcement, so that's why we kind of had that here. We had a timer, of course, so this is very common as well. Here's the timer that we always have available for non-preferred and preferred activities, either or. We would just set that up. And then one of the things, this isn't a whiteboard, but what I found out with Cookie Monster is that if we just put like a brief, like a smaller almost schedule within a schedule, and so if we did a brief whiteboard, he was much easier because he could visualize that he is doing all these things, and then he could get his reinforcement again. So if we had put iPad away, go to C, write, and then, do the iPad again, he would comply much easier than if we didn't have something like this. So I would use a whiteboard because then it's easy to change it up very quickly. But we could do it, we could write it on the back of his schedule, for example, because these are laminated with like the thickest lamination I can get. And these have held up. This is from my classroom, guys, like several years ago. So these have held up really well. Then, of course, the other antecedent-based interventions were the wait time of at least 10 seconds and making sure that we give them a lot of personal space. So that would be embedded, that would be written in part of my plan that at the end of the presentation, you'll have a link that you can go to see. So remember, when I'm going to teach the replacement behavior, it has to serve the same function as the interfering behavior. So it's really important that we select the correct replacement behavior. And you need to go back to the resources to look at these. But again, here's a quick example. It's included in this slide presentation of some example replacement behaviors. So if you remember with Cookie Monster, his behaviors occurred mostly transitions or just transitions into the classroom to begin doing his work, or more likely it was transitioning from a preferred activity. So after he earned a reinforcement, you know, he got his tokens and then he earned the iPad, and it was like, time to put the iPad away. We're going to put it, we're all done. We have to go back to work. That's when we really saw the behaviors escalate. And it was important for me to address this particular issue, to transition from preferred to non-preferred activities, because I still want to be able to reinforce him, but I need him to accept that when reinforcement's over, it's time to get back to work. So we focused on, for this one, the replacement behavior of asking for more time. So instead of his aggressive behaviors or instead of refusal behaviors, to show us that he wanted more time on the iPad, or his other favorite, of course, was when we had the iMac. So that was a nice one too. Then he would, these were the two that he would really give us trouble with, for good reason, right? They're very fun to play on, or to have some apps that you really like. So we had a request more time on the preferred activity as the replacement behavior. So for here, and I'm going to go over the teaching strategies. How did we teach them how to use this replacement behavior? And it includes appropriate prompting strategies. So these I put in blue font. And you have to reinforce the use of the behaviors, and I put that in red font. So as we go through some of these, this is here, so the teaching steps. And my teaching steps and yours, when you write your plans, need to be simple in like a bullet directions type of format. And you want to make it that way so that it's easy for you to implement, but also, and more so, for your aides to implement, right? And so that you can check and see if everybody's implementing it with fidelity. You could create a checklist to make sure that that's going on. So when he got to his preferred activity, he was receiving reinforcement. The first thing we have to make sure is available is his more time icon. So he needs something to tell us, you know, not just tell us, but also point to an icon. So now so we have this available, and of course we have a timer, because we want to keep that visual too. So if he has his timer and then it goes off, beep, beep, we say, I'm going to prompt him as a teacher, and I'll say, it's time to go back to work, or are you all done with that? Or it's time to put this away. But we want to keep those prompts relatively simple and consistent. Now, as soon as that happens, because I want to interrupt that behavior chain, I don't want him all of a sudden to be like, ah, and get upset and throw the iPad or whatever it is. So immediately when I say time's all up, then I'm going to immediately say, do you want more time? Right? And then, so I'm going to point to this, and I'm going to prompt him immediately. I'm not going to give him a chance to use his interfering or his problematic behaviors. Gesture here, would you like more time? And say, I want more time, or simply more time, or help him point to this. But I'm going to give him, remember, some personal space and some time to respond. But my goal when I prompt him right away, and this is for any student, mild, moderate, severe, your goal is errorless teaching. So whatever type of prompts you need to give, your goal is that they pick up on this very quickly. So you're going to use a higher level of prompting than you might initially with other skills that you know students are capable of. And you want to guarantee that they use the replacement behavior rather than their problem behavior. So I want to make sure that he recognizes, I'm going to give you more time if you ask me appropriately, because I want the communication, the appropriate communication of the want, or the appropriate communication of the function of the behavior, to replace that problematic behavior. All right, so for some students, this might require a more intrusive prompt. It just depends on your students. If you're mild mod, it's going to require that you tell them, just, hey, you need to ask for more time. Maybe you give them a card. It doesn't hurt to have a visual for students. And then you'll fade that prompt, to a less intrusive one. But you can do this through various ways, like most to least prompting or least to most. And it just depends on your students. A lot of students, it probably should be the most to least prompting. So whatever gets you that correct response is where you want to start. But for Cookie Monster, I needed to use a least to most prompting procedure. And that's because when he gets too close to people, remember, if I were to use a physical prompt with him, we're more likely to get a physical response and not a good one. So I start with the teaching step, gestural prompt. Timer goes off, gestural prompt. Would you like to use more time? Say more time, and show him how to point to this. And then I'm going to give him 10 seconds in personal space. I'm going to back off a little bit. And if he does not respond within 10 seconds, then I'll go down to modeling. I'll maybe have him tap it and just say, good job asking for more time, and then immediately give him the iPad again. So he can see that connection between this icon and getting more time on the iPad. Then I might move to partial physical, using his elbow or wrist if I have to, or the full physical, right? When we first teach this, we can accept that if I touch this to his finger and reinforce it, then that's okay for some students. We just want to get them to that point of, oh, the more time equals more time, not hitting or dropping to the ground or throwing the item. So for Cookie Monster, I'm going to start with giving him an extra 2 minutes on the timer because I want him to make that very strong connection. And you can see my reinforcement procedures are twofold. One of them is verbally saying, great job asking for more time. So I'm using that specific behavior-specific praise. And then the other one is I'm going to give him 2 more minutes on the timer and 2 more minutes with the iPad. So getting the iPad back is a reinforcement as well. If you're teaching different replacement behaviors, like if it's attention seeking, and then you need to give them more attention, then that's okay. If it's a break, then you give them the break and access to the break that they want. Whatever the replacement behavior is, and it might be that you reinforce them with a token if you need to as well, or whatever your token economy system is. Maybe it's dojo points, so you reinforce them with attention, you reinforce them with dojo points or class money, whatever it is that you build in there. All right, so when I'm initially teaching, I can't just do this. I have to make up a lot of opportunities for practice and prompting and reinforcement. So my initial sessions, I'm going to role play with him and I'm going to go back and forth. And so he will be on the iPad probably for a good 30 minutes while we practice this. So I'm going to set a timer. I'm going to set a timer. Here's your iPad. Here's your timer. Let him play for 3 minutes. Timer goes off. We're going to do more time. Oh, you want more time? Sure, no problem. And then we set it again for 2 minutes. And I do that. And I go back and forth with that role playing a lot so that he starts to make that connection. I make sure that we have a lot of verbal praise and token reinforcement. And then I might put him on, a very quick reinforcement schedule for when he is doing work-based activities. I might have him do less work than normal and then get him reinforced so we can practice this again. One of the other sessions, so to make that happen, I might be like, all right, you asked for more time. We're all done with more time. But then right there where he's at, like if he's at the computer table or at the iPad table, I bring the work to him and then I have him do very simple tasks like, here, write your name. Oh, good job writing your name. And you earned your iPad again. So I can go back and forth with this role playing. You can do the role playing between yourself and the student. You could do it between an aide and a student, or you can use peer models as well. You can have the peer model demonstrate and show this. There's many different ways you can do role playing. Modeling is another great way of teaching these strategies. And I have a lot of students be like, okay, well, how do you break that pattern of getting them off the iPad? And so with Cookie Monster, we would do the role play sessions, like maybe within 30 minutes of a more preferred transition. So he was very motivated by going out to snack and going outside. He was very motivated by going to lunch. So these role play sessions would take place right before those times, so that when it's like, I'm done with the iPad, oh, guess what? It's time to go to lunch. So now I don't have that association of him just doing more time, and then being on the iPad all day. We don't want that. We would have some of these we would have it backed up to a more reinforcing activity. So you kind of plan your role play sessions very carefully. So after we role play with success, I don't know how many trials or how many days it will take, but eventually you're going to help students make that connection between practicing the skill and getting what they want using appropriate communication. So now the next time I'll be like, all right, this time when you ask for more time, I'm going to limit the number of opportunities. And so with Cookie Monster, because of his level of understanding and because of the levels of behaviors that he was at, I was going to give him 2 more opportunities. So he could tell me more time, and then the timer goes off, and more time, one more time. But then after that, it was time to get back to work. So 2 more opportunities, each for 2 minutes. This is my initial replacement behavior. And then, of course, we talk about a fade plan after this. But when the timer goes off again, the teacher will prompt Cookie to stop the preferred activity, right? I'm going to say, okay, we're all done. And then remember my ABI that I put in place earlier? I'm going to show him his brief task analysis of the steps. So I'm going to say, all right, it's time to put the iPad away. And so put the iPad away, go to your seat, write. So if this was the next thing on the list, you're going to write, and then you get the iPad again. Yay! So we have a couple of different outcomes. We have a couple of different things that we have to consider, right? So the first one is he transitions appropriately. Yay! That's awesome. That means that we're doing really well with our more time. Replacement behavior, and that he's making the connection between that, and then also with his token board. So if he transitions appropriately, I'm going to verbally praise him. Great job going to your seat and getting to work. And then, of course, I have his token board here, and I'm going to start giving him his tokens. I need to reinforce that follow through, right? And then while he's working, I want to reinforce very quickly so that he can make the connection between his work and getting the iPad again. If he requests more time again, then I specifically say, great job requesting more time. I'm so happy you used your words, or if he points to the icon, whatever it is, but we're all done. It's time to work. So I'm going to deny him access to that preferred reinforcer. And then if he uses the problem behavior at any point during the transition, so he's going back to his problem behavior, I have to take away the preferred item. So there's a couple different ways to do this. Like, I'm going to try to get if it's an iPad, I'm going to try to get the iPad away from him without a power struggle, right? Maybe I turn it off and it's password protected, so he can't get back in. If it's a computer, I might turn the computer off. So I'm denying him the access to the preferred item. He's probably going to make him mad, so he's probably going to use his interfering or problem behaviors. So I need to wait for him to de-escalate, because I don't want to get injured. I don't want my staff to get injured, and I don't want Cookie Monster to get hurt either, right? So I'm going to give him his personal space, and I'm going to give him his time and at least 10 seconds to figure out what he wants to do. And then we would bring the work to him. He would often drop to the floor, and then I'd sit close to him on the floor, but far enough that I don't get scratched or bit. And get the work to him on the floor, so that now I can start reinforcing that. I'm kind of saying, I don't really care where you do the work at this point, as long as you get some done, so that we can make the connection between the verbal praise and the token board for completing his work, even as not at his seat. That's kind of how I would write out this plan of teaching the replacement behavior. And then we would follow those steps anytime that he earns that reinforcement that he wants. Okay. So you will see I have for both